Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we are talking about the best decks for the WCS in Master Duel. Now, if you don't know the format for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, let me show you real quick what it is. Alright, so if you ever have any questions about where to find the information for the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championships, you can always check it out here at the website's right here. But you can just scroll down here and you can see the actual rules here, and we're going to check out the Master Duel rules, which says, the finals consists of a first stage and a final stage, and the first stage is a round-robin tournament with teams split into two groups. Two teams from each group will qualify for the final tournament. Got it? During rounds, players can talk, yada yada, a whole bunch of stuff like that. Ultimately, what it is a team of three build six decks, and they are allowed to play any of those. Sorry, each player is allowed to play two different decks, right? Each player can choose two decks. Each team is three people, total of 6 decks. However, each deck can only contain a maximum of 3 cards. Sorry, not each deck. The whole team can only contain a maximum of 3 cards across all of the decks, minus a specific shared card, right? So there is 3 different shared cards that they can choose. So for most players within Master Duel, that is going to be Ash Blossom, Max C, and then a third card that they will share across all of their decks, that they're allowed to share. This could be something like Triple Tactics talents to allow them to go second. This could be Called By. This could be an extra deck monster like Zeus or SP Little Knight. It could be a myriad of different cards, but for the most part, you have 3 options of cards that you can share across all 6 of the decks. However, other than that, every single other deck must only contain a maximum of 3 cards, unless that card is limited or semi-limited, in which case every single deck can only contain 1 to 2, depending on whether it's limited or semi-limited, right? So, for example, Called by the Grave, it's a semi-limited card. If one deck contains 1 Called by the Grave, only one other deck across the 6 can contain that 1 card, okay? And it's also a team format where you can choose at any time what of the 2 decks that you are playing. So, for example, if you know your opponent has Snake Eye and Yubel, you could potentially play Kashtira and be like, I'm going to drop Shifter and win with that, right? So you can kind of counterpick your opponents in that regard, right? However, again, remember, across all 6 of the decks, you're not going to see doubles, right? So a team isn't going to have all Snake Eye. Make sense? Now, with that all being said, let's get into what I believe is going to be the best decks. Now, I have already done this on stream, so I'm going to kind of just give baseline thoughts on the placements here and not really go too much into depth. Starting off with Branded, I'm going to put Branded into Tier 2. It's a good deck, it's not insane, but it is a good option across the board. Is it perfect? No, but being able to Puppet Lock is pretty nice, and is definitely going to win games. The biggest downside is that you basically do have to play things like the Bestials, which I think are going to be way more useful inside of other decks, right? But still, pretty decent. Next up we have Centurion. Centurion, I could see people actually genuinely playing and making do with. I don't think it's going to be great, but it is a fine deck. Sky Striker is just not good. I do not think in a format like this, realistically, Sky Striker is very good. The only reason it won last Worlds was because it was tied to Tearlament, which was definitively the best deck, and yeah, that was kind of it. The one game that Ray did end up playing, I believe he lost. So, yeah, I don't think Sky Striker's going to do all that much. Next up, we have Unchained. Unchained is actually pretty decent. The biggest downside to Unchained, though, is the fact that if you are playing a Yubel deck, or any other deck utilizing the Unchained cards, like, for example, Labyrinth could also do this, it does hinder also playing a Unchained deck, because you're not going to, like, allow Sharvara to be in all of your decks, right? That'd kind of be silly when you could choose something like, again, Triple Tack or Nibiru or Droll or whatever it may be, right? So again, for the most part, that's kind of the weakness, is that there are other decks that are a little bit better at utilizing some of these cards, like the Sharvara, that you may want to play, which does hinder Unchained. But overall, Unchained, pretty good. Dino's not going to do much. I just genuinely don't see it being all that useful, even as, like, a secondary option. Just not really all that useful. Same thing with Dinomorphia, just realistically not a great option, and I doubt many people, if any, would realistically choose this, unless it was one of those things where it's similar, again, in nature to, hey, I'm only ever going to play this deck anyway, I'll just throw in a deck I really enjoy. Next up we have Dragon Link, which I actually do think has some viability in a format like this. It does, again, tie to Bestials, which I think, again, could potentially be more useful outside of this deck. However, more importantly than that, I think that overall, the Dragon Link deck is actually pretty good as of right now. It has a decent place within the metagame due to the Bestials doing a lot better thanks to Yubel. So if you're expecting more Yubel, then maybe you're more likely to pick up a deck like this, and it being able to combo consistently through some more mediocre hand traps makes it a lot more powerful. And if you're not expecting to see Nibiru across the board, it does make it a lot stronger, right? So there you go. Next up we have Live Twin. I don't expect this to do anything. Now, I will say, I'm also going to talk about Sprite in this same breath, which I do think is actually a fairly good option. I don't think it's great, or tier 1, but I do think that you should genuinely be considering, or like most players would probably be considering the Sprite, mostly due to the fact that it doesn't really utilize a lot of the other cards, and more importantly, it does have the ability to play through quite a lot, both going first and going second, and you can build it in a myriad of ways to provide a lot of value. Now, obviously, if you would play Live Twin Sprite, it'd be a little better, but again, just Live Twin, not very good. Next up, Exosister. Now, Exosister, I think, is significantly weaker than what it was in the previous World Championship. Exosister was basically the anti-meta strategy that specifically was very good against Tearlament. And basically every team had one Tearlament player within it that allowed them to kind of do something, right? Or the Exosister to do something. And that's not really the case as much in the current WCS format. Yes, Yubel and Snake Eye both utilize the Grave. However, not nearly as much as Tearlament did. They can still do quite a lot without ever touching the graveyard. And because of the fact that basically Snake Eye, while it does need the Grave for a lot of things, it can play like Rescue Ace instead, right? Which could cause more issues for Exosister. Still good, but not nearly as good. Next up, we have Fire King. I'm going to just mark this as Fire King Snake Eye. I think this is the best deck going in. I think it is the strongest. I think it has the most potential. I think it is going to be the easiest to play around with Max C in the format and stuff like that. It is just overall incredibly strong. There you go. I don't think Hero is realistically playable. Kashtira does have some viability in this format due to the fact that it is a shifter deck, and it is a lot stronger than something like Exo by being able to rip things like Promethean Princess, SP Little Knight, etc., right out of the opponent's extra deck, thanks to Unicorn. So it does have a little bit more of that oomph that I think matters a bit more in a format like this. Next up, we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth is genuinely one of the... There are 6 decks that I think every team should realistically be considering. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to play those decks, but these are the 6 that I think genuinely almost every team should have at least 3 of these, I would say. And the reason for this is because, yeah, genuinely you could play all 6 of these and they would be very strong, right? And Labyrinth is in fact one of them. The main reason for this is because in a format like this, in particular, where it is a teams format, where you have the ability to specifically, like, counter-pick, kind of, it makes Labyrinth significantly better, right? They have the ability to play a very different strategy and a very different axis that most other decks aren't really prepared for, especially a lot of the other top decks, right? And On top of that, again, it's really good at counter picking, right? So, for example, this is where something like Unchained could be very useful, is, hey, having that counter pick to something like Labyrinth. Unchained is insanely good against Labyrinth, but Labyrinth is also, like, extremely good against Snake Eye. And it's extremely good against Duel. And it's extremely good against a lot of these other archetypes where, you know, a lot of these other top archetypes, right? Due to the fact that it is a trap deck. And, well, I should say, it's not very good against Fire King, but it is good against UL. So, like, you know, give and take. So, there you go. Labyrinth, I do think, has a fair shot in this style of format. Pendulum, I just don't think has much merit. I'll put it in Rogue. I think there's maybe potential with, like, basically a pseudo FTK style build. But for the most part, because of the way that the coin flips work in Master Duel, there is a chance that it's just, you know, determined prior to actually playing the game by the coin flip, right? And I think you just have to be lucky if you wanted to play the pendulum stuff, so I'm actually going to move this down. Next up, we have Manadium. Manadium, realistically, I could see it being used, but not very often. I think the best case scenario for this is that it is your second choice for very specific matchups. I really don't see it actually being all that useful across the board. But I do think that it has some merit. And I'm also going to put Infernoble in here as well, where it's just like, cool, here is a secondary deck that allows you to just kind of, like, combo off against, I don't know, maybe, like, lower hand trap style decks, right? Things that specifically require a lot more card investment, right? So, for example, like, Dragon Link, I could see, you know, Infernoble doing well against, like, Dragon Link, or Infernoble doing well against, like, Branded or something like that. Something that doesn't really have the ability to play lots of hand traps, right? So you just kind of get to play the game. So, something like that. Next up, we have the Mathmech. Mathmech, I think, is just good across the board. Any cyber strategy, just generally, I think is fairly decent. I'll put Salamangreat kind of up here too. They basically do the same thing at this point, and that is more or less just comboing. And again, with Nibiru not being likely in most of the players' decks, yeah, you could probably get away with playing a very heavy combo deck. Yeah, that's basically it. As opposed to something like Infernoble and stuff like this, they still have the ability to play hand traps and still OTK going second and all of that jazz. It's not like they have to go first. They really can play both going first and going second, which makes them a lot better. So there you go. Next up, Makonko. This could be a niche pick in order to just kind of like OTK. Again, similarly, the problem that I have with it is that Yubel does exist and is a deck that realistically has a lot of merit in the current metagame. So with that in mind, is it necessarily worthwhile? Hard to say. I just noticed Yubel is not technically on this list, but don't worry, we'll talk about it. Phantom Knights, I don't see the point of playing Phantom Knights at all. I would be very, very surprised if anyone played Phantom Knights. If anything, they would probably play it just to have fun. Which is probably not likely to happen. Same thing with Punk. Yeah, I really don't see a world where there's like a Punk deck that shows up and does very well. So there's that. Now we have Pearly. Pearly is one of the other decks at the top tier tables, and the reason for it is pretty simple. It's really good. It's extremely good. A lot of top players have been consistently talking about how good this deck is going into this format, and it's just across the board. And yeah, it is incredibly strong, right? It has the ability to push through boards very easily due to happiness, or happy. And you also have the ability to make a big unaffected guy, which is very good in a format like this as well. It is really consistent without utilizing a lot of the cards that most other decks need to utilize. It has the ability to play mostly engine, which is very nice. It has again, playing on a different axis from a lot of the other decks as well, which means that it has the ability to play some more like targeted hate and stuff like that, and it has a lot of really good matchups just across the board, right? Yes, it does have a little bit of consistency issues, but I don't think that's as big of a deal in this style of format. So, all in all, I think, yeah, easily tier 1. Next up, we have Rescue Ace. Now, Rescue Ace is interesting, because I genuinely believe it's not quite as good as Fire King Snake Eye, or even just pure, like, Cash Tira Snake Eye. So this is actually one of the decks that I'm going to put into tier 2, and the main reason for this has less to do with... It's basically, why play Rescue Ace when you could play Snake Eye? And use the Diabell Star stuff for Snake Eye, right? Unless you're, like, wanting to put Diabell Star in 2 decks and use that as, like, a shared card, you could potentially do that, but realistically, you're just kind of making your boards worse, right? Now, to be fair, Rescue Ace is fine. It's a good deck. I'm putting it in tier 2 because realistically it still has the same power as a lot of the other top decks, as all of the decks that I'm going to put in tier 1. The problem is that by doing that, you're taking away your best deck. You're just automatically removing the best deck in the metagame for a slightly weaker version of it. So it's like, why do that? Right? That's basically it. It's still a good deck. It still has a lot of capability of just like winning the game on the spot and just doing really well. So there you go. Rika. Rika I could see as... Actually, Rika I would only ever see as a second deck. Yeah, that's basically it. I'm also going to put Makako in here. I don't know why I didn't earlier. But yeah, Rika, Plant Link, pretty much only ever going to be the second deck, right? Next up we have Runic. Runic, I actually think, alongside Stun, just in general, is actually a very good option in this metagame. So I'm actually going to put both of these up here pretty high. Maybe not above Kashtira. But yeah, I genuinely think that in a format like this, having a Stun deck within your team is going to be highly valuable, because that means players have to prepare for that and have to be cognizant of that within their own plays. And then on top of that, you can always just switch to it at any time and throw a player off, and then just boom, here's a floodgate. Do you have the out? Probably not. Good game, right? So I do think that there is a lot of merit to that. Is it fun? Absolutely not. I would hate to see that, but genuinely, it is a good strategy. Next up we have Naturia, which I just genuinely... You could potentially play it. I don't see it being all that useful, but yeah, all in all, Naturia exists. You can play it with the Runic stuff. It's okay. I don't think that there is like a good Naturia deck that's really worthwhile, right? But there you go. It does exist. Next up we have Scareclaw, which I genuinely just don't think it's going to do anything. We have Snake Eye, which I kind of already talked about, so I'm not really going to talk about it too much. But it technically goes up here as well. It's not realistically one of the... Well, no, it is. It is one of the 6 decks that I'm... that belong up at the top there. And, yeah, it's pretty simple. Snake Eye, even pure, is insanely good, right? A lot of top players are TCG players as well, TCG and OCG players, so they have a ton of experience with Snake Eye, so they're going to be more comfortable with it. It's going to make more sense. They're going to know the combos, they're going to know the lines, they're going to know the understanding and the deck building philosophies, which is going to make it better for them. On top of that, it is just a very good deck. Okay? Make sense? Makes sense. Coolio. Oh, no, sorry, it's not technically one of the 6, but there you go. Next up we have Super Heavy Samurai. Super Heavy Samurai I think is a pretty decent option as well, similar to all of these combo decks, as just like a deck for your second deck to just kind of like a OTK or something like that. Actually, it's not only as a second option, you could play it similarly to how Dragon Link is kind of played. As just like a, here's a problem, force your opponent to solve it kind of thing. Sword Soul, I just don't see doing anything. We already talked about this one. Tearlament. Genuinely, extremely good in the current metagame. Also, in this style of format as well. Again, not utilizing a lot of the same shared cards. This is definitely the weakest of these top 6, I'm going to say. But the main reason that it is so powerful is due to the fact that it still has that consistency that you kind of need from a top deck like this. It doesn't falter as much to hand traps, and it gives a lot of agency to really strong players to just like do well with it. So there's that. It also has really, really strong end boards and has the ability to play going second without utilizing a whole lot of non-engine. So there's that. Also, notably, this is the deck you could very easily throw Super Polymerization into and have work really well, right? So this is kind of like your board breaker deck. If you're not going to play Branded, you could play this and play a whole bunch of board breakers and have it be like a very strong strategy. And then next up, we have Voiceless Voice, which I think is also very strong. Voiceless is just a good deck, just across the board. It plays well into Max C. It does really well against hand traps. It is extremely consistent. It has a strong set of interactions. It can play very well against a lot of the other decks in the at the top, right? And it can play a whole bunch of hand traps, which is nice. So there's that. Right, but it doesn't have to play a whole bunch of hand traps as well, which is also very nice. And also, Saravis is insanely good. Just like an insanely good card, especially with Link monsters being as prevalent as they are. Vanquish Soul I could see being a deck that someone, you know, picks up and uses as like kind of their anti-meta option, right? Where it's like, cool, I'm going to make sure that I play Shifter and Bestials and stuff like that and just, you know, sucker punch Yubel in the face or something like that. Same thing with Zodiac, very similar in nature. Now, I'm actually going to use this as Yubel. So there you go. If people are confused about why there's no Yubel, there you go. Let's real quick talk about Yubel. Yubel is very clearly the second best deck. I think that Snake Eye, far and away, still the best deck. Fire King Snake Eye is still the best deck. But Yubel is a very close second. It does have the ability to do a lot of the things that the Snake Eye engine does, right? But instead of utilizing the Fire engine, it utilizes a lot of the Fiend stuff that has had a lot of support as of late, right? With the Unchained stuff, with the with like Phantom of Yubel being a really powerful card, and all of that jazz. So there you go. All in all, that's pretty much the list. Yeah, and I think genuinely if a team were to show up with all 6 of these top decks, Snake Eye, Yubel, Labyrinth, Pearly, Voices, and Tear, they would probably do pretty well, because those are all really, really solid. They have, they're specifically good against, like, you can pair them up in a way that a specific deck has another deck as coverage for its weaker matchups, right? For example, Snake Eye has something like Voiceless Voice against, you know, more targeted hate, right? Or a better example is like Labyrinth, right? You know, you have Fire King Snake Eye and Labyrinth paired together, or like Voiceless Voice and Tear Lament paired together, or something along those lines, to just kind of solidify some of those matchups, right? So yeah, all in all, I think those are like the top 6, and it's very clear and cut in my mind. Right. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like it very much, so appreciate it. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.